Sorry about the delay there, I was flaking. I watched your video on how the universe is like a jellyfish. And I will say, I do find it interesting and intriguing, and do somewhat agree that there very likely could be a universal consciousness, since, as you said, much with the way neurons interact in the brain, it is similar to say that due to the interactions of the universe that there could be a present consciousness. And I think that while some people have disagreed with the idea that it could be equivalent to a human consciousness because of the whole sensory thing, I think you're on the right track. Here's my thoughts on it. First of all, what do we know about consciousness? Does consciousness really require outward sensory? And can consciousness exist without outward sensory? Now, say for example, if you put a person in a sensory deprivation chamber, does their consciousness cease to exist? The answer obviously is no. So therefore, the consciousness can exist within a sensory deprived environment. Now, I would say for us, beings that are extremely used to sensory input, we are a lot more uncomfortable when thrust into a sensory-free environment. When put into an environment where there is no sensory input, we tend to freak out and we'll have hallucinations and whatnot to try and make up for the lack of sensory input. However, what would you get? And of course, we can't do this with a person because it would be inhumane and all that, but just theoretically, what if you raised a person in a sensory deprivation chamber and, you know, you found ways to keep them alive, etc., etc. Would they not be a conscious being? I mean, at some point, you know, they would have to have some conscious ability. It's hard to say what that would be in comparison to the conscious abilities of one who has been in a sensory environment, but I would say that they would still be a conscious entity. Therefore, consciousness can exist without sensory input. Also, what about the phenomena of, say, somebody has an arm or a leg cut off, and then the place where that limb was will itch, even though there's no viable limb there to feel the itch. Then, we ask, is such seemingly sensory input related feelings, is sensory input basically, let me condense my thoughts here because I'm getting off track. Basically, maybe our concept of sensory is wrong, because without a brain, without a consciousness, those outside forces mean nothing. And so sensory input per se is not completely based on what goes on outside the body, because how can a limb that isn't there itch? The itch isn't an outside perception. The itch is in your mind. The itch is in your consciousness. Therefore, the consciousness does not need a body to have sensory input, because all sensory originates in the brain in the first place. And without the brain's ability to detect those sensory, the external sensory, the brain does not cease to exist, but instead it's just lacking in that particular area. And the other thing is, one might say, say for example, trying to think about this here, putting my thoughts together on the fly, kind of. The consciousness of the universe, if likened to the consciousness of the brain, one might say, wow, I'm really gonna have to cut this part out. Let's say if the universe has a consciousness, and that consciousness is directly linked. The consciousness is both consciousness and body. Its sensory input comes from what goes on within the universe, as well as the fact that the universe makes up that consciousness. Then that consciousness has things to think about. And what if, let's just say, we assume that there's nothing outside the universe to give it sensory input, but we're just basically, in the whole of the universe, if we're going with the theory that the universe is a conscious entity, in the whole of the universe, we're just little neurons. Can a neuron understand the ramifications of the sensory world outside the brain and body? No. At least not in my frank opinion. Therefore, how could we possibly know for sure that there isn't something out there for the universe to sense? Maybe the universe does have a world all its own, and we just don't have the capability, being that we're not the universal consciousness, we're just a teeny piece of it. We don't have the capability to gather and understand what the universe's world is like. And all we do is serve our purpose as a neuron in the mind of the universe. So, that's my ramble on the universal consciousness, and I think you're on the right track, and the universe is most definitely a jellyfish.